Thank you to eFulfillment Service for sponsoring today's video. Check them out if you plan on publishing your own board game so they can handle the logistics of getting your game out into the world. Hi everyone, and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be speaking with Zachary Strebeck, a lawyer who specializes in the board game and video game industries. And we're going to discuss the questions I get asked most often by board game designers about legal issues like copyright, patents, and trademarks, as well as clarifying some of the confusing legal language found in licensing agreements with publishers. So I first reached out to Zack almost 10 years ago in 2016 when I got my very first contract from a publisher, and he helped me review the contract and made sure I was getting a fair deal. I highly recommend any designers out there who get a contract from a publisher to work with Zack to review it and make sure everything looks good. So I'll link to his website below where you can contact him, and you can also sign up to his newsletter where he shares some really great insights on the board game and video game industries from a legal perspective. So, with all that said, let's start with the number one question I get asked most often by board game designers. They'll say, I'm worried someone will steal my game idea. Should I patent, trademark, or copyright my board game? So, Zach, can you first explain the difference between patents, trademarks, and copyrights, and then answer the question about whether or not a designer should patent, trademark, or copyright their game?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here. And yeah, this is actually a question I get fairly often too.
I'm
Should I,
sure.
like, a lot of designers are so afraid to even share or play test their game with anyone, right? Because this is a understandably a precious thing for them, right? You've created it and you don't want it to be stolen.
Right.
There's good news and bad news here. Let's first talk about the three different types of intellectual property you talked about.
Sure.
Patents basically protect new inventions or innovations of other inventions, processes, things like that. They are they last in the US for 20 years, and they can protect the kind of underlying game mechanics of game design, which is
Right.
great. It sounds perfect, right? It's the exact same thing you want to be doing to protect your game. Unfortunately, they cost about $10,000. They do, and I mean, so many games don't make
Wow.
anywhere near that $10,000, and designers, especially with their royalty rate, probably don't make that amount on the average game.
Yeah.
So it's a real tough sell to tell someone to go file a patent for something that may never actually get that money back. The
Right.
reason it's so expensive is because the lawyers are expensive. It's a pretty specialized lawyer that needs to do it. They have to pass the special patent bar and all that. And it's a time-intensive process. There's a lot of back and forth with for the search and then filing the application, drafting the patent claims, and then going back and forth with the examiners. So it's tough and it's a long process. It can be years. So I don't know. The cost benefit analysis there is probably not great. And
Right.
honestly, very few of the clients I work with do it. Mostly you're going to see companies like Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, that like the bigger companies are the ones that are filing these because they have the money and they have the reach to make that back, right?
Right. And would it be like one patent per mechanic, basically, one specific mechanic you have in a game?
Yeah, there's a good example. One patent that's always talked about when people talk about board game patents is the Magic the Gathering patent on like tapping a
Yeah.
card and getting that mechanic. Well, actually, what that patent did was outline the whole flow of gameplay for Magic the Gathering, and
Okay.
that's what it was protecting, right? It was this like gameplay sequence.
Okay.
So it wasn't just like the mechanic of tapping a card, right? So you
Okay.
don't do individual mechanics, you're kind of doing the whole gameplay flow, as far as I know. Now, I am not an expert at patents,
Sure.
so yeah, but that's my understanding of what you would do for a game perspective. Now, you may also patent a specific thing. Like, let's say you invent something new, for instance, I don't know, like you have this contraption in the middle of your game that does something to the game and is new and innovative. You could potentially patent that. It isn't the game mechanics, but it's like an invention that you're using
Sure.
in the game. That could be patentable and that could be useful for other games, let's say, or you want to license it out and you want to make money from that, and that would be good. But, if you patented deck building as a concept, I mean, maybe that would have been something protectable, but others could make changes to it. And that's kind of the good thing is you can innovate on your own and,
Right.
you make changes and you do it in a different way and they could kind of get around your patent, I think. So I don't know. The utility is weird and the sort of philosophical thing behind it of stopping others from using this. I mean, if people were doing that, then so much of what is in gaming now wouldn't exist
Right.
because they would have locked out others from kind of innovating on these mechanics and all that. So I don't know. I'm a lawyer and I protect intellectual property, but I also like playing games. And so it would be
Right.
a disaster if Dominion was the only deck building game or whatever, right?
Right.
So that's patents. I don't know. Typically, people don't do it, but it really is the only way to protect this. Because the problem is copyright is the other one,
Right.
which protects the sort of original creative expression in your game. It's the artwork, it's the characters and the story and the writing and all that, how you've written the rules, but not any of the underlying rules and mechanics and things like that. So none of
Right.
that's protectable by copyright. And again, a good thing because it allows the innovation, it allows the mechanics to be used, but it also allows someone to basically come in and just clone your game with a retheme, and they can do
Right.
it. And there's really nothing you can do to stop it. There's a case involving the Bang card game.
Right.
Um, it must be like 8 years ago now, but basically they said another company came in and rethemed the whole thing, used the same character powers and the game mechanics and all that, and it was okay because under copyright law, you really can't protect against that. Apples
Right.
to Apples and Cards Against Humanity is another good one.
Mm-hmm.
But just the whole game industry is working on people reusing mechanics and sort of remixing them in different ways. If you just
Right.
clone a game, I don't know, you might just get looked down upon by the
Right.
fans and the industry. So
Yeah.
you really do want to have some kind of innovation there.
Right.
And then trademarks. Sorry, one more. Trademark protects your brand names. So, for instance, the name of your game, the name of your company, logos, like the Nike swoosh, things like that. All that
Yes.
stuff is protectable by, and it's basically an identifier of the source of goods. So when someone goes to a store and they see a name of a game or a company name, they know it's coming from that company behind that trademark. So if you have expansions and things like that, it stops others from just making unofficial expansions to your game using your name and sort of
Right.
confusing the consumers to think that it's
Right.
coming from you. So, okay. Unfortunately, patent is really the only way to protect those underlying game mechanics. But the good news is, I don't know, people aren't out there just stealing games. Everyone's got their own game ideas, honestly, and everyone. I've never had someone where I said, just go and play test it. I mean, the way you get exposure to your game is putting it out there, taking it to play testing events, taking it to the publishers, speed dating events, and things like that, pitching it. That's
Yeah.
how you get people to notice it and to get it published. So if you're just keeping it close to the vest all the time, I don't know, no one's ever going to see it, and you're never going to get anything out of it. So I don't know. You have to set it free, right? In order to get
Yes.
people to look at it.
And so I have said I've read a lot of your blogs. Obviously we've talked and I
Mhm.
have said this quite a few times in my videos, but now this is coming from a lawyer. So
Now, obviously, it's not legal advice. You could have
Yo, yes,
something
this is not legal
if
advice,
you're
but
watching this, that is really patentable and does have the potential to make a ton of money, and therefore it would be worth
sure.
it.
Yeah.
However, I mean, it's tough, and there are options. I should go back to this. There's something called a provisional patent, which is something that you will file today, and it almost like reserves an extra year for you to file the full patent. So you
Right.
could file the provisional, pitch it to publish, try to get a publisher to pick it up and maybe pay for the patent, or at least you see that there's kind of a proof that it could make money and then it's worth spending the money on it. The other problem is when you put it in the hands of a publisher, they may change it anyway, right? I mean, they
That's
may
the
like that
big
you have it
thing, yeah.
patented, but they're probably going to make changes to it. Same with the trademarks and the copyright. If you should have prototype artwork and things like that, most likely the publisher is not going to use that. So it's not worth
Right.
copyrighting it. And trademarking is good if you know you're going to use that name later on. But
Right.
if the publisher is going to come in and change the name, it's probably not worth filing anything until you've kind of talked with the publisher and figured out what
Yes.
the final name is going to be. And they may file the trademark for you.
Right. So self-publishers probably need to look very seriously into trademarking.
Yeah.
Designers who pitch to publishers don't really need to worry about that because, yeah, the name will
Yeah.
probably change anyway. You don't need to trademark things if you plan on pitching to a publisher.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
And for the Bang Dice game case that you mentioned earlier, so if the copycat had literally copied and pasted the rules, like the rule book from
Hmm.
the dice game,
As they
and
were written. Yeah.
exactly how they were written, then that could be a case for copyright. Uh,
Yeah, or use the character designs. So the
right.
character powers, the powers are basically just mechanics, right? It's like,
Right.
draw two cards if you play this card or something like that, that kind of stuff. They're just more mechanics. They're not
Hmm.
specific to the characters. But if it's, cowboy with, this and that,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
yeah.
they're unique things and aren't just like tropes of the genre, then those are protectable by copyright, even if they're
Right.
more like ideas than the actual kind of artwork and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest one for people to wrap their heads around is it's the
Hmm.
expression of the rules
Sure.
that's protected, not the actual underlying mechanics of the game.
Yep.
So once people can kind of understand that, that starts to make a bit more sense. So thank you for clarifying that. Those are like
No problem.
really, yeah, that's really good information
It's a
to know the
lot.
difference.
And
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
And it's good to know the difference between the different things. So people will say like, yeah, should I trademark my game? Well, you can't trademark a
Hmm.
game, you trademark the
You should
name
make
of
the
it,
name.
you know.
Yes.
So just understanding
Yes.
the difference between the three different things and if it's worth your time spent investing that money into protecting something
Hmm.
that might change anyway or might not even be protected.
I should say this too. There is a fourth secret intellectual property type. It's called trade secrets. And these are things
Ah,
that you can't file publicly because you're keeping them secret, right? So copyright, trademark, patent, they all require like a public filing to record what you're actually protecting. When you have a secret, and this could be a game design, right? You've come up with a secret game design. The way you protect that is with reasonable security measures and actually keeping it secret, right? So you have a non-disclosure agreement between you
right.
and the other party, right? And so if you have playtesters, you could have them sign an NDA. You go to pitch a publisher, you could have them sign an NDA. But what are the chances that you're going to have a publisher sign an NDA just to see your game that they've never seen and they don't know you from anyone, right? Same
Yeah,
with playtesters. If you're going to get your family to playtest your game and you have them all signing NDAs, I mean, it feels a little weird to have them signing a contract that you could like enforce against them when
right.
they're just giving you their time. You're not paying them.
Right.
If you pay them, that's different. But if you're not paying them, it seems a little
Right.
crazy to have them sign a contract. I don't know. Some clients do it, right? They want to do it. They want that
Sure.
extra layer of protection, and it's
Yes.
totally understandable. But yeah,
Yes.
that's the
People
other way to do it.
people definitely can. It's just having the full knowledge of what you're getting into and what everything means and just really understanding
Yep.
if it's yeah, like you said, if it's worth that cost.
Yeah.
So speaking of contracts, um, let's talk about licensing agreements in the board game
Hmm.
industry. Can you explain what that is and who owns the rights to a board game?
Sure. Sure. Okay. So a license, all that is permission from one person or entity to another person to do something, right?
Right.
It's like a driver's license, right? It's permission from the government to drive a car, right? So a license to use intellectual property, which is what your game is, your game design, is just permission in a contract of, hey, you can take this game design and you can go and publish it and whatever you want to do with it, right? Make a digital version, blah blah blah, make movies out of it, whatever you want to do, whatever you
Hmm.
want to license to them.
Right.
So that's what a license agreement is. It's just a contract that dictates the terms of you giving them those rights. It's not transferring ownership, typically, right? You retain the ownership as the designer and you're just giving them a right to use it. And typically there's going to be ways to stop that license, right? Or there's going to be parameters like a scope, like for instance, it's only in the US and Canada or something like that. Typically, that's not the way it is. Usually, it's a license worldwide if, with a publisher. But if, for instance, you publish the game and you want to license it out to a German publisher to do a German version and publish that only in German-speaking countries, that's a license with a more limited scope. Sometimes they're exclusive, sometimes they're non-exclusive, sometimes they're limited to just board games, and sometimes they include board games and merchandise and plush toys and stuff like that, and also digital versions of the video or the board game and maybe other stuff, film, TV. A lot of these agreements, they want basically every right. And that's one thing I usually will pull back on because
Right.
if a company never made a movie based on a board game, I don't typically want to give them the rights to that exclusively
Sure.
in case someone approaches me to do that, right? And they're not getting that done. So you always want to think about who you're licensing it to and what the scope of those rights are. And also, I mean, the problem is with a lot of these agreements is that yes, you retain the ownership, but due to the contract terms, it's essentially like you gave them full ownership of it because there's no way out of the license. So many contracts that come to me or contracts you see talked about online are like really awful for the designer and really have no way. A lot of them have no expectations on the part of the publisher. sometimes they don't actually even have an obligation to publish the game. Sometimes they specifically say they don't have an obligation to publish the game, but there's
Wow.
also no way to kind of terminate the agreement. And you bring that up to the publisher
Oh,
and they say, well, of course we would never do that, right? We would never like just hold on to
yeah.
this game, blah, blah, blah.
Just
Or,
trust
we
us.
would never, yeah, we would, of course, if it's not selling anymore, we would give it back to you. But having that in, if that's the case, having that in writing, I don't see an issue with that. It's sometimes tough for a first-time designer to get a good deal like that, right? Or to really push back on some of these things. Like, for instance, I will put like, we deliver you the design, you need to publish it within 2 years, or run a Kickstarter campaign within 1 year,
Yeah.
something like that. And also, like, if it's not selling at least X number of units or generating X amount of revenue per year, we want to get those rights back. And a lot of times publishers push back on that, or hey, we have to kind of find a place in the middle, but you want to hold them to some standard because if you just give them the game and they have no obligations on their end other than paying you a royalty if they publish the game, then they may not spend any money marketing it. They may just never do anything. They may not, bother to buy artwork and things like that, right? Because a lot of times the publisher is going to be handling all that stuff. And that
Right.
also works into the ownership, right? You own that design that you've given them and maybe any iterations on it, all the development you do, but they're going to get artwork for it. They're going to potentially name it and get rights to that name, and all that other stuff, right? They may get rights to derivative work. So, for instance, like an add-on or expansion or maybe a sequel, they may have rights to do those and to own those in the contract. So you got to be aware of what they're going to own. But typically, they're going to own the artwork that they pay for, and
Right.
maybe a lot of these, try to push for something where like you can buy back the artwork if
Mm.
the contract ever terminates, so that you can keep publishing it, things like that. You get the trademark back, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of ways, once the contract ends, hopefully on good terms, that's the other thing. A lot of them are just in perpetuity and they go on forever.
Mm.
So we try to put some sort of limit on there. But again, if it's a hit, the publisher's interest is in keeping that hit going forever and being one of those evergreen games that keeps
Right.
selling forever. So it's a push and pull, you get it. And the more the games you design that are successful, the more likely you are to be able to have, some bargaining power here. If it's your first
Right.
design, you're really not going to be able to push too hard, probably. You can try, but
Right.
you may also like one of the things I'm always cognizant of when I'm doing these is what am I going to do that might destroy the deal, right? Am I going to push too
Mm.
hard and the publisher's just going to walk away because they need to
Right.
spend tons of money on their lawyer to go back and forth with me on a million points?
Right.
It's going to depend on the designer, right? And how much say they have in getting these things uh,
Right.
to go their way.
Right. And yeah, one of the big things too that we need to understand that you mentioned here is we always having some sort of exit strategy, exit agreement in the contract
Hmm.
because you can get the rights back to your game and then you
Yeah.
can pitch it to other publishers. That's your
Hmm.
game to do whatever you want with. Yes, you will probably lose the art if they invested that.
Hmm.
But if you get the rights back from a publisher, you can then pitch it to other publishers, which is something I think a
Yeah.
lot of designers might not understand. They think, oh, my game is with them, it's with them forever. That's not true. If it doesn't work
No, you
out,
see lots of stories, yeah, where people
yeah.
end up getting their games back, or
Hmm.
yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
But
So
again,
you've
you got to watch out in these contracts, though. They may have rights to, sometimes they want to write a first refusal for any expansions, any
right.
sequels, any other works in the same world, or maybe even any other game you design sometimes. That's more
Oh,
in the video game
wow.
space
Oh,
because,
interesting.
designers are usually designing maybe a lot of things at the same time. So it's a
Right.
little weird. But like for a video game company, you're going to be doing the next game, right? Because there's
Right.
so much work that goes into it. Not that there's not a lot of work that goes into game design, but you may be working on multiple things. So yeah, some of these contracts they're pretty overbearing about that.
Hmm.
So just something to watch out for. Yeah.
Yes, and that's why it's really good to have someone like you who can understand legalese because
Hmm.
we might get contracts like this and not even realize that that's what it's saying because the
Yes.
language can be like
Yeah. It could
it
be.
is like a whole
Yeah.
nother language.
Yeah.
Like yeah, it'd be very hard to
And it's
understand.
funny. Some of the AI tools that they have now are pretty good at sort of parsing what the language says and all that, but they're
Okay.
not 100%. And I don't know,
Yeah.
sometimes a lot of people will use these tools and sometimes they tell you what you want to hear, and maybe it's how you're prompting it or whatever, but like that is a suggestion. Use these tools because they're usually better at reviewing these things. But I've had a lot of reviews come back when I'm on one side and then there's somebody on the other side, and you can tell that AI did it because a lot of times they're sort of,
Mm,
restating the same thing or doing it. It's weird. It's almost like a human didn't do it, but I don't know.
right.
That is an option if you need to
Yeah,
understand the contract.
sure, sort of the basics, but yeah, I would
Mhm.
definitely feel more comfortable like I did having you actually look
Yeah,
over the
yeah,
contract, a human look over the
yeah.
contract, and you found things that there's no way I would have understood that that's what they were saying. So that
Yeah, it's
was,
it's tricky. Yeah, the more you
yeah,
see them, 10 years on, I'm
yes,
just better at finding those things, and you just get more
yes.
experience every time you see one of these, for sure.
Exactly. So this is
Mm-hmm.
especially important, I do think, for first-time designers, first-time
Mm-hmm.
published designers, to work with someone who has that experience and that expertise. So you did mention a few things that, are important to have in these licensing
Mm-hmm.
agreements, having some way to get out of it if it doesn't work out.
Yeah,
What are some other, well, like, yeah, so what are the top five things that
right.
designers should make sure are in these licensing agreements?
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, starting at the beginning, one of the first things is the scope of the license, right? How much, like, let's say you've created your own world and lore and all that for this game, and it's not a simple dice game. It's like a whole thing that there's more to it than just the underlying mechanics. Well, you may eventually, and I've seen it happen, get offers from maybe video game companies want to make a game based on your IP, or you have authors wanting to write stuff, or people start pitching you when the game becomes popular. And the
Right.
question is, did you assign or did you license all those rights to the publisher or not? So making sure that the scope, and again, it's like I said before, if they never do this stuff, like I've had some that get all merchandise rights and things like that, and I look on their site and they don't make any merchandise for any of the games. So I wonder, why should we give you these rights? Of course they want it, but
Right.
should they have it, right? Are they going to do anything with it? And
Right.
even if you give it to them, maybe if they don't exploit it within a couple years or something like that, right? There's no movie deal in 2 years, so the rights go back to me, right? Something like
Right.
that. That could be possible.
Having
So
some
just messing
limit
with the
to it.
scope. Yeah, having some limit and maybe some reversion or something like that
Yeah.
um, is a great idea. That's number one. Number two, royalties, being very clear about what you're getting paid, when you're getting paid, and what that payment is based on. A lot of times, first you'll maybe get an advance. The advances are usually pretty pitiful, but there's a movement to get bigger and bigger advances these days. But usually, especially as a first-time designer, you might not get anything. You might get some nominal, like $200 or $500 fee or something like that, and
Right.
that's in advance. They give you that, and then your first, let's say, 500 in royalties are going to be credited against that to
Right.
repay that advance, and then you start getting paid. And then, you got to look at the royalty definition, because the net revenue, or whatever we call it, may it may deduct the manufacturing costs, may deduct all their marketing costs, it may deduct
Right.
blah blah blah, shipping, blah blah blah, all this stuff. So you got to look, and when you think about that, just think about how much of a game's, so they're already getting what, like 40% or something of the MSRP, and then they're deducting their manufacturing costs, so that the actual you may get like 8%, but that 8% is based on this tiny little fee portion of each game. So you want to be aware of that and make sure that your royalty rate is higher or lower depending on like how it's being calculated. Some like to use MSRP, some like to use the actual amount that comes in, right? So if a distributor pays them, $10 for the copy of the game, your royalty rate's based on that. And there's no deductions, right? Because
Right.
that, and a lot of publishers probably like that too. They don't have to send you all these statements about all the deductions they made and things like that. They're just, here's the money we got, here's your percentage. All right.
Right.
Or sometimes it's like a flat fee per unit, right? And that's the simplest. Like we sold 10 units, you get $2 a unit, here's
Mm.
$20, right? That's the easiest. And hopefully you make more than that. But yeah, that's number two. That's always good. Number three is, I like to have something in there where you get free copies of the game. It's always nice to
Yes.
be in there. A lot of designers want that. And I'll give it one related to that, because I just added these to a contract today. And credit clause, right? Saying that they're obligated to put your name on the box, your name in the rule book.
Yes.
If they do a digital version of the game, your name's supposed to be in that. So you want maybe you have a logo or a company or something like that. You also want to have that in there. So just making sure that they're obligated to put that in there. And I've had some publishers that don't want to put the designers' names in there and things like that. And it's, I
Wow.
don't know, first disrespectful, and then, I don't know, you want to be able to say to other people especially when you're pitching new games, that I designed this game, and if your name isn't on it, then
Yes.
that feels wrong, right?
Yes.
So definitely something to look for. Credit clause.
Yeah. And
I
if
would say
not on the
that's
front
the
of the
pretty.
box, at the very least
Mhm.
in the rule book.
Yeah, in the rule book, somewhere where you can say, "Hey, I designed this game," and make sure it's
Yes.
accurate, right?
Yeah.
Designed and developed by, or designed by, or artwork by, whatever you've done. It's
Right.
not even just for designers; it's for anyone that contributes to the
Yes.
game. You want to have your name in there.
Hmm.
Um, Yes. And then, yeah, making sure the ownership is correct, right? Making sure it's very clear that you retain the ownership. That's funny. We talked about copyright. We talked about all the different intellectual property rights and how none of them really fit, maybe the patents, right? None of them fit with this thing that you've delivered to them, right? It's a prototype of a game, and all it is game mechanics. And if you don't have a patent on it, you don't really have any rights. So it's kind of like this legal
Right.
fantasy where we're licensing these rights that we don't even really have,
Right.
right? And it's an interesting thing, and they're promising to pay us for this thing that they could really just get from us and steal and go make their own version of the game,
Right.
especially if they're putting their own artwork and all that on it.
Mm.
So, but I mean, the way I think about it is, if that was the case and publishers were doing that, then you wouldn't have anyone pitching games, and publishers would have to come up with them
Exactly.
themselves. So
Reputation
it's
is important.
exactly right. And so, I mean, that's definitely something. If you're afraid to pitch to publishers, looking them up, seeing if they are scammy or if they have stolen designs. Like, you Google the publisher and see what kind of reputation they have, and that's one way to do it. Because if they
Hmm.
have a good reputation, they're probably not out there stealing people's games. Because I
Exactly.
guarantee you, people would be screaming about it. But yeah, okay, I think that's four. And number five is, like we talked about, ways to get out of the contract, right?
Right.
Typically, there's, yeah, like a timing element, an availability element, right? So, like, for instance, they do the first printing, and then they're all sold out, and the publisher just isn't printing more. But let's say they had a 10-year term to sell it in, but for 8 of those 10 years, they're not selling anything. Well, you're missing
Right.
out on royalties you could potentially be getting from another publisher or
Right.
self-publishing it, something like that.
Right.
So
Yes.
you want to make sure that if the game is not commercially available, the rights will revert to you. And not making money, not selling units, they don't publish it within a certain amount of time. All that stuff are ways you can get, or they breach. They don't pay you your royalties on time, right? And you can typically be able to send them a notice that they're in breach, and they have 30 days to pay you correctly. One more is having something called an audit clause in there, which allows you to
Mm.
audit their books and records about the royalties, just to see and confirm that what they're paying you is actually what they're supposed to be paying you. Because a lot of times
Yes.
they don't do it, right? They're hiding
Right.
things, or they're just paying you some amount, or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Because we
So
don't
a
get a
lot of
ton.
things. There's a lot of things
There's a lot.
in
Yeah.
these
Those are the
agreements.
top
Yeah.
five, but they're, yeah. Yeah. In the royalty reports, we don't get a lot of information. It's
Yeah.
very
It's another
sparse.
thing.
And
Yeah.
so you're just
Yeah.
kind of trusting that they did,
Yeah.
in fact, only sell this number. You don't know who they sold it to. You don't know when they sold it. Like, it's
Yes. And so that's something maybe you also want to stick in there about what the royalty report. So typically it'll say something like, we'll pay your royalties quarterly within 60 days of each quarter or something. And then there'll be a report that goes along with it. What you should say maybe is that the report should contain things like, what, the SKU was, what territory
right.
was sold in, what the price was, sort of breaking it down so you can really see what's being, because so many times I see like game and then like total amount. And
Yeah.
it's like,
And that's
that's it, right? There's no other
it.
information, nothing there. You may
Yeah.
not get like, sales receipts and things like that, or invoices. You may not get access to that unless you audit, but at least, having a breakdown of where it was sold and how much it was sold for and all
Yeah.
that stuff would be helpful for
That
sure.
would be,
Yeah.
yes. Well, those are fantastic. So continuing on about licensing agreements, I'm going to
Hmm.
read out a line that could be seen in a licensing agreement. This exact was one wasn't
Yep.
from one of mine, it's just from a template I found, but if you can translate this for us lay
Yep.
people, that would be fantastic. So, licensee will pay licensor a sum of money on the sale of products derived from and utilizing the licensed products sold by licensee and or its affiliates equal to 5% of net sales or 2.5% of net sales where the primary product incorporates or is marketed utilizing any property from a third party for which licensee owes a payment.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a typical. net or like a royalty provision, right? But what it's saying is basically they're going to pay you a percentage of the money they get from the sale of products using the licensed property, which is whatever you're licensing to them, your game design or whatever, that they sell or their affiliates sell. And affiliates is capitalized in the example you gave. But that means it's probably defined somewhere. It probably is like other companies that are sort of related to them. They control
Right.
them like subsidiaries. Really, it should be sold by licensee or any sub licensees, right? People
Mm,
who they have sub license to, which are like you license it to them and then they sub license it to a third party, like for instance, a distributor or a retail store or something like that.
okay.
Regardless, I mean, typically what I like to say is, the money that licensee receives from all of, any from exploitation of the licensed property, right? So that includes more than just this is it almost seems like overly specific that it's
Yeah.
specifically who it's sold by. Shouldn't matter, right? You want to get the money that they receive from it, right? Um, and then equal to 5% of net sales. Now you have to look at what net sales means, right? That could be deducting a million things. 5% is pretty low, so you probably should be looking for 5% is not super low, but it's also not super high, right? I mean,
Right.
typically you're going to see like, especially for first-time designers, mid single digits, right, of percentage. But you have to look at what that net sales means. Are they deducting a million things? And is that 5% based on like a tiny fraction of the sale price? Or is it the actual money that they receive and there's no deductions except maybe like if they get refunds or chargebacks and things like that, like money they don't actually make, they end up having to pay out. That kind of stuff.
Okay.
Maybe that's what they can deduct, but you want to minimize what they can deduct if you can.
Hmm.
But they also have in here something where it's 2.5% of net sales, where the primary product, which is the game that utilizes your design or whatever you provided to them, incorporates or is marketed utilizing any property from a third party for which licensee owes a payment. Which is basically saying if they took Mickey Mouse and made a Mickey Mouse version of your game, they need to pay Disney a certain percentage, right? And so because they are incorporating that third party IP and they need to pay that they need to pay Disney, they're going to cut your royalty rate in half for those products. Where it gets interesting is that they also use is marketed utilizing any property. So, if they put Mickey Mouse in the ads for this, but Mickey Mouse isn't even in the game, they would still cut your percentage in half. And that's sort of not your decision. So I feel like that, while it could help, have Mickey Mouse in the product and also maybe just advertising it. I would probably remove the marketing part and maybe redefine this so it's a little clearer that it's just about like a new version of the game that is sort of like primarily featuring that third party IP or something like that, right? I
Right.
wouldn't necessarily, this is a little broader than I'm comfortable with.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. And it's amazing too because I've read over this blurb at least 10
mhm.
times. And like that did
Yeah,
not even I did not pick up on that or is
yeah.
marketed by a third party. So yeah, they wouldn't even be on the game
No, not even
branded on the
by a
game.
third party. It's utilizing any property from a third party for which they have to
Oh,
owes a payment. So I mean, it's like every little piece of it is
yeah.
broader than it should be, right?
Right.
Utilizing any property. I mean, that could mean anything, right? That's
Hmm.
so broad. And then for which licensee owes a payment, like it's not necessarily even a royalty obligation or like a percentage of the revenue. It's just a payment, right? So I don't know. It's
Yeah.
too much, too broad. I would definitely
Yes.
try to pull that back
Try to
for
push
sure.
back on that a little bit for
Or
sure.
get some sort of an approval right. I don't know if you would get that. Depends on how strong you
Mm.
are as a designer in your history. But approving any of these like third party licenses that go into the game, possibly you could get that if you're a big enough designer, but probably not.
Right.
So narrowing it is probably the better way to go.
Right. And the sort of logic behind this lower royalty percentage for us designers, if
Hmm.
there is a third party attached to it, the idea being that this should theoretically increase the sales for
Right.
you. And so you should make more money because this third party IP is attached to
Right.
it.
Yes, and also that they have to pay, Star Wars or Lucasfilm or Disney, 15% of the usually the gross sales, right? A lot of times they will calculate that based like it's the first thing they pay, and then they deduct things, and then they pay
Right.
you, right? So a lot of times
Yeah.
it's not only is it reducing your percentage, it's also reducing the amount of money that you get, right? And so
Hmm.
that may actually be included in the net sales as well. So that could be another deduction or it could be an off the top deduction. So just something to be aware of. You may be getting hit twice on this. And so that may be something to push back and say, look, you're already deducting this. You're recouping this first. I shouldn't lose money here, right? I should still get the same amount,
Yes.
the same percentage. So I don't know.
Yes.
Everything's negotiable, and
Right.
one of the big things I tell, especially new designers or new game studios when they're dealing with a publishing agreement, is that publisher wants to publish your game, right? You have value and it's okay and it's totally normal to negotiate these terms, right? If you accept the first agreement they send you, you're going to be, I don't know, you're not going to be happy in a few years when you realize that there's no way out of it and all this other stuff. Even if they seem friendly and even if the business people are telling you one thing, a lot of times the contract is saying something completely different. So,
Right.
you know, trust but verify, whatever you want to say. Sometimes the business people don't understand what's in their contract, or sometimes the lawyers are
Yes.
drafting these and they're
Yeah.
not talking to the business people, and everyone's, hey, this is our template, just use it. They don't know what's in it, right? They probably look at this and think the same thing you're doing. They have no idea what it's talking about because
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. It's totally normal to push back on this stuff.
Yes.
Very occasionally, I'll get a publisher or another party that says, "I can't believe you made all these changes. What is going on?" And I think your contract sucks. It's not good for us. So why would I agree to all these things, right? We're giving you unlimited rights. I mean, I just did one recently where they just couldn't believe that I made these changes. And one of the things was that if you breach the agreement, we get to take over the game and you transfer the rights to us and we don't have to pay you anything. Well, that's great. I mean, now you can take my game away because you claim that I breached it. It's
Hmm.
ridiculous, right? And yeah, I don't know. You got to look for that stuff, and it's totally normal to push back on that. Especially when the amount of money is small, right? If they're not giving
Yeah.
you a big advance, if they're not expecting to make a ton of money, if they're not promising they're going to spend X amount of money to market this game, whatever, right? If their risk is really low and your risk then turns out to be really high, that you're going to
Mm.
lose basically the rights to your game, well, you
Yeah.
gotta look, the balance of power is always going to be with the publisher. They're always going to be able to, strong arm you a bit, right? Like one of the things at the end of the contract is like where the disputes get resolved, right? Where you have to go to court if you want to sue them. It's almost always going to be where they are. It's going to be friendly to them. They're the top
Right.
dog here. You just have to deal with it. And a lot of this stuff, you just have to deal with it. You can't push back on everything. But, some things are just, red line that you can't cross. And, if you have a way that you could potentially lose your game and not get paid for it, or, they lock up the rights forever and don't even have to publish the game. I mean, that stuff's ridiculous. So
Yeah.
luckily there's a movement to push back against these practices. Now, the bigger the publisher, the probably more onerous the terms are going to be. And you put up with it because you're potentially going to sell a lot more, right? And it's a gamble. You never know you're going to sell a lot more, but you get a lower rate, you get whatever, like less rights to get it back or whatever because they're a huge company and they can sell into Target or Walmart, right? And you may have or Barnes and Noble or whatever, right? You have a potentially larger pool of sales that you're going to make more money, hopefully with, but you never know. It's
Yeah.
tough, tough
Um,
business.
yeah.
I don't know.
But that's
Yeah.
why it is really nice to have someone like you on your side to really help like guide you through these
Yeah.
things because yes, it is we wear a lot of hats as indie game designers. Trying
Hmm.
to understand legal documents should not be another one that we try to wear
Yep.
because it's just
I agree, and I mean that's why I have a business. And
yeah,
you didn't ask, but I'm not cheap. All right, now I'll totally admit it. Right, I mean it's not cheap to have a lawyer review one of these things. Takes time. We have high hourly rates and all that, but that is I don't know. It's one of those things. Like I would say it's a question of how much. How much do I love my design and want to kind of protect it against these bad things that we've been talking about in this interview? Or is it something you don't really care about? And it's like, okay, well, if I end up not getting a good deal here, I'm okay with that just
sure.
because I don't care. It's my first time or whatever. And I do understand that. And it's not always worth paying, $600 or something to a lawyer to review an agreement when your advance may not be that much, and you may never actually make the $600 back, right? But again, you may be paying something to just get your name out there and get a game published, and there, potentially you move on to other games and you can show success from another one. But yeah, it's tough. I understand.
Yeah.
I don't know.
One thing you mentioned too about,
Mhm.
possibly having your game being held hostage by a
Yeah.
publisher is there's also a big opportunity cost. Like
Hmm.
if we sign with a publisher and they have the rights to it, we can't pitch it to anyone else. We can't do
Yep.
anything with it until they actually, hopefully, put it out on the market. And so I think
Yep.
you maybe have mentioned this already. I can't remember exactly, but having some language in there too, saying we commit to getting this on the market within this exact like within this time range. So if they
Yep.
don't specify
Definitely.
that, then yeah, it could just sit there and you can't do anything with that.
Yeah, and sometimes it's even worse. Sometimes they'll have kind of like non-compete type clauses where you can't release a similar game either. So technically, like even if they haven't published your game, you can't do a game with similar mechanics, or I mean, they may lock up the kind of world that you've built around this game. All that stuff can be really onerous if there's nothing in there that forces them to actually publish your game.
Right.
Yeah, it's tough.
Well, yes, I do think the cost is definitely worth it, especially for your very first contract. You'll learn a lot working with someone
Mhm.
like you who just translates these things for you. And then when you, like you said, you get another contract, you start to recognize things and you start to see similar things pop up. But also getting your newsletter is really helpful. You also have a
Trying.
blog.
It's tough.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so what are the best ways for people to connect with you if they have more questions, or
Mhm.
they want to stay up to date on what you have going on?
Yep, definitely. Yeah, it's streetbacklaw.com. Actually, easier way is gamelawyer.blog.com. That's the easiest URL, I think, because that'll bring you to the blog. You can click the contact page, or any of the blog posts, I think has like a little sign up thing on the right side, right? So, check out any blog posts, and there should be a way to sign up for the newsletter.
Yeah.
And that'll actually like give you a bunch of emails. Now they're probably for video game people, but a lot of the concepts are still there about trademarks and about contracts and all that stuff. So it's useful info, but you'll also be like on my mailing list in general to be able to get the newsletters that I send out a few times a week when I'm not traveling or super busy. But yeah, I'm trying to get them out more regularly these days. But yeah, it's gamealerblog.com is probably the best way. I don't do like Twitter or anything like that, so yeah, the website is best. And my email's on the contact page on the website. If you ever need to reach out, I'm happy to do what I can.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Zach. It's
Thank you for
always
having
so
me.
great talking to you about these things. I always learn so much. So, and I know a lot of people watching this are going to learn a ton. So, thank you again
I
for
hope
your
so.
time.
Yeah, no problem. All right, it was great being here. Thanks.